Hello everyone, I'm Peter, known as Bant is Love on MTGO. This is a four-color Reclaimer deck list that my friend Ryan and I worked on. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Ryan.
Hey, I'm Ryan, Bucksy Bible Babe on MTGO. Um, I am a former Mox Opal deck builder pretty much exclusively, and then now I'm just moving on to whatever's powerful in the format. That's it.
And we also have one other person in the chat. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Jimmy. I don't really play MTGO, so I don't have a moto handle, but I am just trying to learn and give a little bit of insight. Maybe they missed something that I see or I think's pretty cool.
Alright, excellent. So let's give a basic rundown of this deck. First and foremost, this is a Elvish Reclaimer deck, very much based on the green-white Reclaimer decks that we've seen recently pop up on MTGO 5.0 deck lists, as well as challenges. The core of the deck remains the same. We have 4 Elvish Reclaimers. We have the Flagstones package to go with Reclaimers. We have Dryad of the Legion Grove here to uh, combo with Valakut if need be, and we have Primeval Titans at our top end. In order to make the deck more consistent, we decided that it would be best to have 4 copies of Eladamri's Call, and aside from the utility lands being Blast Zone, Bojuka Bog, Field of the Dead, Cavernous Souls, Radiant Fountain, and I don't know if I'm missing one here. Castle
You
Garenberg
could argue
situationally.
that, yeah, Garenberg is technically.
Right. We decided that it would be best to take the green-white Reclaimer shell and increase the card quality because we are already running effectively a 3-color deck because of the Dryad of the Elysian Groves, Valakut, Molten Pinnacle synergy. So, the idea behind this deck is to not have to play cards like Springbloom Druid and Arboreal Grazer, and instead play higher quality cards like Omnath, Locus of Creation, Shalai, Elder Gargaroth, and a handful of other cards in the sideboard. Our main ramp package, aside from the previously stated Elvish Reclaimer, Dryad Elysian Groves, Castle Garenberg Flagstone synergy here, is Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, which is a major payoff for playing in 4-color as opposed to 2 or 3-color. We also have Explorers because they function as both a sort of better late game draw, as well as fitting nicely on our curve if we don't happen to have our 1-drop in hand. Utility creatures that we can find in order to get ahead on mana with Eladamri's Call are Sakura Tribe Elder, Omnath if we happen to find one of our 6 fetch lands in our deck, and Uro if we find ourselves in a very interactive situation and we want a recurring threat. Primeval Titan is our choice of top end. Truthfully, we could have chosen a lot of green cards for this slot, but it turns out that playing a card that can be found with Call, as well as just being a large body in general, synergizes with what we're doing here more so than playing a card like Hour of Promise, even if Hour of Promise would have fit on the curve a little bit more nicely being at 5 instead of 6. Now that we have the main deck out of the way for the most part, we can move on to the sideboard. We have a handful of utility creatures here in the form of Eidolon of Rhetoric for the combo matchups, as well as some red Xerox decks. If you can get this down early, it's very helpful. Gaddock Teague is a very helpful card against cryptic command strategies, as well as Dredge for Conflagrates, Oops All Spells for Goblin Charbelcher, and a handful of other strategies as well in Modern. Hexdrinker is a wonderful card to have in this deck. You'll find yourself with a lot of mana lying around in the mid to late game, and Hexdrinker is an excellent way to get under cards like Mana Leak while being able to double spell early on. Knight of Autumn is here for utility. It can be a threat, it can gain 4 life, it can kill an artifact or enchantment. It's great against a wide variety of decks, and I think the card just speaks for itself. Kozilek, previous versions of this deck were able to cast this more effectively, but Kozilek is here mostly as a bane to the blue-black mill strategies that have made an appearance in Modern. Phyrexian Revoker is a card we're going to be trying out for this league. It looks like it has a lot of potential against the early combo decks. Oops all spells. It's also good against Death and Taxes. Being able to name Ether Vial, Swords, Batter, Skulls, Stoneforge Mystics, whatever it may be. Moving on, we have Chalice of the Void. This is a contentious spot in our sideboard. We went through many options before eventually landing on this one. We found that this is the best hate piece that we have for decks that tend to get under us. These decks being the red-based prowess strategies, as well as black-red shadow or other lower to the ground Thoughtseize decks. It also has minor play against decks like Ad Nauseam when they try to cast Angel's Grace, and finds its spot pretty much randomly in the format when we would find it useful. This card is a non-bow with Path to Exile and Elvish Reclaimer. Most of the time when we board this card in, we tend to go down on Reclaimers because they tend to be removed pretty early on. But Cavernous Souls does help a lot with getting through our own Chalice, and although Chalice and Path don't play nicely with one another, Chalice is such a strong card against decks that Path to Exile would be good against, that the trade-off is worth it most of the time. Celestial Purge is a card that is excellent against a lot of the metagame right now. Ashiok, Blood Moon, and a handful of other cards become real problems for our searching the deck land-based synergies, so having access to 3 of these adds a lot of sideboard strength as well as hate for a lot of the otherwise counter-hateful cards that we'd run into. And lastly, Winds of Abandon functions really nicely as both an early game removal spell for a problematic creature, as well as a late game mirror breaker if we ever get into board stalls against decks like Death and Taxes, other weenie decks, or even Black-Red Shadow if we find ourselves with enough mana. Ryan, did you have anything else you would like to add?
Yeah. So I want to go over modifications and how we got to the deck, where it is from its original form. Its original form had, let's see, we started with 4 Titans. We had only 2 calls. We had 2 Omnoth and 3 Uro. A lot of things got shaved for various reasons. We shaved Titan and went up in the number of calls because we figured out pretty quickly that having access to Skyclave in the aggro matchups more consistently was more important. Having access to Omnoth in multiples was not nearly as important. Having access to Uro Explore effects was just already super consistent. So adding more calls and shaving some of the top end ended up being better. We added Shalai for a couple of reasons, but one of the main reasons we ended up keeping it, which was surprisingly the activated ability, made it so that in mirror matchups where everybody's making all of these 2/2 zombie tokens, we were able to pull ahead by turning ours into 3/3s, 4/4s, etc. So that's been a really shocking thing. It's good against Liliana. It's good against a couple of other things. Gargaroth would be the most recent creature added to the main, and it was just, again, we keep losing some of these games to like red prowess and some of there's another variation on prowess. There's the version that plays only odd numbers. What's that guy called?
Mic on.
That's Obosh.
Yeah, the Obosh ones in particular are like super fast and consistent. So we tried putting another main deck, not just like anti-burn card like Shalai, but anti like super consistent creature draw card. Outside of that, going to the creatures in the sideboard, Hexdrinker has been really, really impressive for any game where they're shaving a lot of their small creature removal stuff. Like a lot of decks like Jund would potentially shave a lot of cards like Bolton Fatal Push in favor of trying to just have an aggressive start, and Hexdrinker has been like a good way to punish that line. Eidolon Rhetoric kind of was in the initial phases. It stayed because it's not just good against the aggro decks that are good against us, but it's also like a pretty ridiculous target for call. It doesn't affect us almost ever. Teague is similar. Night of Autumn is new. That's a note to say. We originally had a second Skyclave apparition, so we switched to Night of Autumn, and hopefully that's going to not be an issue. It means that we have fewer removal creatures in post-board games, but being able to gain the life and trade off will hopefully improve the aggro matchups. That's the only thing I'm thinking. We're also going up a Chalice, which is due to some shaves that we made to the sideboard, so that also is going to be a new thing we're trying out. This is a simpler sideboard than it was before. What we got rid of Ether Gust. Ether Gust wasn't really doing much. Most of the matchups where that card is good, I think that we're actually already doing better. Or Chalice will just be a more like powerful effect against them. So that's the only things I was thinking.
Okay. Jimmy, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you guys said everything perfectly.
All right. Well, thank you for watching the Deck Tech, and let's hope you stay for the matches.